Tonight on Bridge City News, Maclean's magazine came out with its list of Canada's most dangerous cities. We will tell you where Lethbridge ranked. The chief of police in our city speaks out about needing more money for more police officers. And police in India raid various call centers at the center of the CRA scam, which has taken millions of dollars from Canadians. Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Maclean's magazine has come out with their list of Canada's most dangerous cities heading into 2019, and the top three were Alberta cities. Wetaskiwin was number 1, followed by Red Deer, and Lethbridge came in at number 3. The information came from Stats Canada measuring all police-reported crime. Sergeant Bruce Hagel with the Lethbridge Police Service says over the last 5 years, the drug crisis in our city has led to this result.
We saw an increase in usage of fentanyl and fentanyl in the streets and then car fentanyl. And so the concerns that we have come about in the last number of years, and along with that kind of drug use, you see increase in property crime, vehicle break-ins, house break-ins, garage break-ins to feed those drug habits.
When it comes to violent crime, Lethbridge is ranked 39th. Criminal justice students at Lethbridge College are not surprised that our city is ranked so high.
It's got its nickname of Methbridge, so between the amount of drugs that people are doing and just the area of the city in general, doesn't really surprise me.
We're pretty close to the border, and I haven't lived here very long, and someone already broke into my car. So,
drug habits we have around here, and the more different ways we have of doing it, like with the safe injection site and stuff like that. They kind of, in my opinion, it's kind of adding to that and making it like people are okay to do like crime and stuff. And as well, we've always had a history here of doing like trafficking and stuff like that.
Yeah, maybe a few break-ins from here and there, like people breaking into people's cars and all that stuff that I've actually seen happen.
Lethbridge Police Chief Rob Davis says we need more boots on the ground. Davis says $3 million is what our city needs to keep our city safer.
The big two for us are the CPOs, community peace officers, that would see the addition of 15 CPOs, as well as the implementation of an ambassador watch program, a very robust ambassador watch program that would guarantee visibility from April 1st to October 31st every year.
The plan involves welcoming members of diverse communities to join law enforcement.
The police service get their foot in the door. We'll work with them to become officers one day. Similarly with the watch, a big part of that. If you look at the program in Vancouver, the program in Winnipeg, just amazing entities to show the diversity of the city, which we need in Lethbridge.
The new initiatives will be put into place by the end of 2020. Lethbridge police are asking for the driver of a U-Haul truck who tried to break up a robbery earlier today to come forward. At about 5 a.m. this morning, a 51-year-old woman was approached by an unknown female on 5th Avenue South. The woman demanded cash, and when none was provided, she assaulted the victim and fled with her purse. During the altercation, a male driver of a U-Haul came to the aid of the victim. The victim is in hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. Police are asking the U-Haul driver or anyone else who may have witnessed the robbery to call police right away at 403-328-4444. Lethbridge residents are quite concerned about the rise in property taxes. Now that's according to Nicole Geske, Vice President of the Lethbridge Chamber of Commerce. Geske spoke at an open mic at City Hall yesterday, which allowed residents to voice their opinions or make short presentations expressing their concerns. Geske also says to help our economy improve, we need to attract more businesses to Lethbridge.
We want to make Lethbridge a stronger and better place to do business. We want people to look to Lethbridge to grow, to start new businesses, and that builds a stronger community, right? So you've got a strong business base, you've got a stronger community, people are happy and healthy here. So that's the message that our members want us to deliver and get across.
More business means more people and a stronger tax base. It has been estimated that the City of Lethbridge is expecting close to $141 million in property tax revenue in 2018. This is International Education Week at the University of Lethbridge. Various activities are taking place across the campus to welcome their international students. Today, Fresh Fork Catering played host to the Taste of the World, a chance for students to sample foods from various cultures.
So they feel more at home here, since lots of them are a long ways away from home. So it's nice to make them feel wanted and welcomed here.
Events for International Education Week continue on campus through Friday. A group of university students brought home gold from a recent competition in Boston. The collegiate team project named Vincent focused on developing tools for other synthetic biology researchers. The U of L iGEM team beat out over 300 other teams from around the world for the prestigious award. Research on the project will continue as they look to target mussels with species-specific toxins. One of the largest problems facing Alberta waterways, zebra and quagga mussels are considered aquatic invasive species and a threat to the Alberta economy.
They really liked the way we addressed the problem, and involved the public and involved what's known as human practices, so talking to people who are experts and that kind of thing.
A local group of high school students also took home a silver medal on their research into removing harmful metals from tailing ponds. Is our consumption of meat actually bad for the environment? A recent study out is examining greenhouse gas emissions in livestock production. Gerard Lampo finds out what cattle producers are saying.
Researchers led by Oxford's Dr. Marco Springman are saying that a meat diet is hurting the environment. The study contends beef consumption needs to fall by 90% and be replaced by 5 times more beans and pulses. Cattle producers are weighing in.
I think it's really important to look at the big picture of beef production, to look at the vast grasslands that are utilized, that are lands that aren't suitable for other types of food production. And it's these kinds of things that these types of studies don't often take into account.
Adrian Ivy ranches with her family in Ituna, Saskatchewan. The study also points to a balanced diet relying on plant-based food and protein.
Protein is really important, and my little young athletes, it's really hard for me to get enough protein into them, even with having meat in their diet.
The land used for beef production may not be useful for any other food operation, and if it's not grazed, those areas could be vulnerable to grassland fires. The Beef Cattle Research Council points out that greenhouse gas emissions are down 15% in the last 3 decades. However, concern remains about the warming of the environment by cattle.
Whether or not the animal emissions make a significant contribution to that warming, I don't think anyone can state with any kind of conclusive evidence.
Dr. Joe Schwartz is a chemist whose work helps to simplify chemistry and food issues. He says he loves meat, but there's more reason to cut back as a lifestyle choice and not for greenhouse gas emissions.
There are issues with different kinds of meat. Processed meat, of course, has been linked with colorectal cancer by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. Red meat as well is listed as a possible human carcinogen. And then, of course, there is the impact of growing all the crops that are needed to feed animals.
Schwartz questions meat processing and points to studies that speak of the benefits of a plant-based diet. He's not ruling out eating meat, and it all comes back to a balanced diet.
A question on curbing some of the excessive intake that we're seeing here in North America. And of course, the production of fertilizers, production of pesticides, the shipping of the cattle, the shipping of the grains, all of those have a carbon footprint.
Cattle rancher Adrian Ivy says vegetables are really important, but there's no better source than meat to get energy levels that her kids demand.
There's really no other better source than beef to get the combination of iron, zinc, protein, and B vitamin 12.
Many of us who are old enough to remember the 1980 Winter Olympics in Calgary remember what a special time it really was. Now, the Stampede City is considering putting a bid in for the 2026 Winter Olympics and Paralympics. The city of Calgary still has not recovered from the recession, and many Calgarians don't want the city hosting a $5 billion event like the Olympics. The Yes side, however, was out in full force yesterday, including British ski jumper Eddie the Eagle Edwards, who was brought to Calgary for the big rally.
I'm here to help promote the Yes vote for Calgarians to go for another Winter Olympics in 2026. That's why I'm here. They did such a great job in 1988, over 30 years ago, and it's about time you had another Winter Olympics. And I think it could be even bigger and better than ever before. There's a lot of people who think that they shouldn't do it, it's going to cost too much, etc. But I think it would be a tremendous boost for Calgary, a boost for their economy, a boost for young athletes, for kids to train on Olympic venues, and I think it'll be great for Calgary, so I'm all for it.
Calgarians will vote in a plebiscite on November 13th on whether or not they feel the city should move forward with a bid to host the 2026 Winter Games. The Canadian Professional Rodeo Association says the city of Red Deer has embraced the Canadian Finals Rodeo. The 6-day season finale wrapped up yesterday to a near sellout. Edmonton's Northlands hosted the CFR for 44 years, but after it closed, the venue changed to Westerner Park in Red Deer to act as host for the next 10 years. Westerner Park CEO Bradley Williams says officials, however, would like to see more community involvement and rodeo-related events around the city for next year's finale. A Calgary NDP MLA says she will not sit in the legislature to protest what she's calling a culture of fear and intimidation. Calgary East MLA Robin Luff says Albertans are being poorly served by a system that requires MLAs to vote party lines in all cases. She says statements and questions are often scripted. Luff says it leads to hyper-partisan rhetoric with no actual debate on bills. Luff says she's had other members' statements taken away and private members' bills edited till they were not exactly what she intended. Luff says she will boycott the legislature until a resolution has been presented. Corporate and union donations will be banned in our province's municipal elections under a bill introduced by the NDP. The changes mirror rules already brought in to limit contributions and increase transparency around provincial campaigns. Under the proposed legislation, people can donate up to $4,000 during an election year to municipal campaigns. It is the same total amount to school board races. If the rules are broken, they will be investigated by the Office of the Election Commissioner. An Alberta Mountie faces charges following an alleged break-and-enter. Police say a homeowner and a resident in Tofield reported that an officer forcibly entered a house and assaulted them both last week. The pair alleged they convinced him to leave, but he returned and assaulted them once again. Constable Dan McCarty is charged with assault during a break-and-enter, assault, and 2 counts of mischief. RCMP say McCarty was not on duty at the time of the alleged assaults. Many of you remember the tragic story of 19-month-old Ezekiel Stephan, who died from what was believed to be meningitis, and criminal convictions on the parents of David and Colette. In part 2 of Fighting for Ezekiel, we sat down with the Stephans to share the story of their ordeal, the social media reaction, and discuss parental rights.
Upon receiving the autopsy report, that I became suspicious that they were going to lay charges. The amount of death threats that began flowing in immediately.
Death threats?
Death threats.
To you?
We've had over 300.
Oh my goodness.
The Crown was trying to use our court case as a precedent-setting case wherein parents could be held criminally liable if they didn't vaccinate their children.
Stay tuned for part 2 of Fighting for Ezekiel coming up later in our broadcast. If you missed part 1, you can view it anytime online at bridgecitynews.ca. Federal Tory MP Michelle Rempel was asked about the potential impact in Canada of a caravan of migrants moving through Mexico in hopes of reaching the United States. The immigration critic says Ottawa needs to respond to the caravans.
Canada is not immune to the waves of migration that we've been seeing in Europe, and that's a significant change in terms of the pressures on our border. The government needs to say how it is going to respond to that, be it increasing pressure up through the United States from caravans such as this. I'm not sure what's going to happen over the next few days, but with regard to Canada, I mean, we have the sovereign responsibility to manage our borders.
Veterans across our country will have something to celebrate as Canadians mark Remembrance Day and the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War. An NDP proposal was passed in the House of Commons today that specifically says all money allocated to Veterans Affairs Canada in a specific year should be spent. That means veterans across Canada will now be receiving around $124 million more than they are now. The money will be targeted towards improving services and reducing wait times and backlogs many veterans face when trying to access benefits. Over the past couple of weeks, police in India have been raiding illegal call centers, the same groups that have been involved in the so-called CRA scams. You know, the ones where they call you and threaten to send the police to your house unless you pay up. Many arrests have been made and thousands of dollars in electronics equipment have been seized. Police say they've arrested 28 people in just one of their sweeps, including 2 leaders of the operation. The CRA scam has been lucrative for these crooks in India. Over the past 10 years, thousands of Canadians have apparently given more than $10 million, falling prey to the same CRA scheme. U.S. President Donald Trump is making a final elections argument by claiming the Democrats will take a wrecking ball to the U.S. economy should they win the midterms today.
A vote for Republicans is a vote to continue our extraordinary prosperity. A vote for Democrats is a vote to bring this economic boom crashing down very rapidly. The Democrat agenda will deliver a socialist nightmare. That's what it is. The Republican agenda is delivering the American dream, optimism, the American dream.
Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, says the U.S. midterms could be a make or break time for the Republicans and U.S. President Donald Trump.
Obviously, this is a very important election, probably more so for the Republicans than the Democrats, in the sense that this is a referendum on Donald Trump and how this administration is doing, and probably some sort of indicator as to where we're going towards for 2020 and the presidential election.
Catch my full interview with Lisa talking midterms and how Central America has a new drug crisis on its hands. That's coming up after business news. The pop-up Museum of Pizza is now open in New York City. It celebrates pizza as an art form.
It's often that the simplest ideas are the best, and we wanted to use, pizza's ubiquitous appeal to get people through the door and looking at art and hearing about history in a different format. Our approach to this Museum of Pizza is a fine art approach, so we went out to multiple artists, contemporary in many mediums, and asked them for their interpretation of pizza. And what we got back is, it ranges the gambit. Let's just say that. That's an understatement. Crowd favorites have been the UV Room by the artist Gazoo to the Moon, and Shauna X's piece with the lipstick compact pizza.
Anytime you say pizza, I will definitely be there. We had light snow off and on today and cool temperatures in many parts of southwestern Alberta, but good news, the mercury will be climbing. Eventually. I'll have a complete look at the weather picture in just a moment. Snow off and on in many parts of southwestern Alberta today. More snow developing in Lethbridge tonight with a low near -11. Tomorrow, periods of snow tapering off with a high of -3. Thursday, mainly sunny with the mercury climbing to -1. Friday, the clouds return and we should see a high of 6 degrees. Saturday, a mixture of sun and cloud and a high of 4 degrees. Sunday, cooler with a high of only -1. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 7 degrees and an average low of -5. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1949 at 23 degrees, and the record low was a chilly -23 in 1945. Sunrise was at 7:28, sunset at 5:02. Let's have a look at the national forecast for tomorrow. Mainly sunny in Vancouver with a high expected near 10 degrees. Pretty much the same picture in Victoria. Calgary will be partly cloudy and a high of only -3. Edmonton will have a mixture of sun and cloud tomorrow and should see a high of -7. A good chance of flurries in Regina on Wednesday with a high of only -8. Saskatoon will be mostly cloudy and -10. A 30% chance of flurries in Winnipeg and a high of -4. Over in the central part of the country, Toronto will have rain and 6 degrees tomorrow. Ottawa will also have showers off and on and 9 degrees. Montreal will be mainly cloudy and 11. Over in the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will have rain and 11. Halifax, Nova Scotia will be rainy and 15. Charlottetown, PEI will have rain off and on and should get up to 12. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, they're expecting showers and a high near 15 on Wednesday. Alberta Agriculture says producers can get a free customized business analysis of their operations. A team of specialists with Agri-Profits will analyze the physical and financial aspects of the farm business. Livestock economist Ann Boyda says the first year involves a time commitment because of a lot of information need to be collected, such as building and machinery investment lists. Boyda says the following years can be built on that foundation. Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation says housing starts and sales will be down over the next couple of years. CMHC's housing market outlook says growth in housing prices is expected to slow to more in line with economic fundamentals. It says the slowdown to a more sustainable pace will continue into 2019 and 2020. Rising mortgage rates are also expected to affect housing demand and the resale market as buyers shift towards less expensive housing options like condos. The National Aluminum Associations of North America have issued a joint letter urging for an end to tariffs within their trading bloc. The national associations in Canada, the U.S., and Mexico say tariffs should be lifted before the new trade deal is ratified. They say the new USMCA cannot work for the aluminum industry without exempting Canada and Mexico from the tariffs. The associations state that no tariffs or quotas are needed because action has already been taken by the three countries. Look out, Amazon! Walmart is coming to steal your lunch and maybe your dinner too. The world's largest retailer surpassed the e-commerce giant in a survey of online food shoppers, more of whom said they mostly visited Walmart's site for groceries. Local supermarkets were in third place. Walmart moved ahead thanks to the launch of its curbside grocery pickup service, which is now in 2,000 stores. An additional 1,000 will be on board by the end of next year. Amazon, meanwhile, offers grocery delivery for its Prime customers in 60 cities, with in-store pickup now available in 10. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Maclean's magazine came out with a list of Canada's most dangerous cities for 2019, and Lethbridge came in at number 3. The top 3 were all Alberta cities, Wetaskiwin was number 1 and Red Deer was number 2. The information came from Stats Canada, measuring all police-reported crime. When you see news happening, drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's top stories, check out our full newscast online at bridgecitynews.ca. Governments around the world are demanding answers in regards to the murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari has details next. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Check out the Pottery and Glass Art Christmas Sale being held from November 8th to 10th, beginning at 10 a.m. at the Westminster Community Hall. Admission is free. Discover beautiful, unique gift ideas crafted by members of the Old Man River Potters Guild and the Lethbridge Society of Glass Artisans. Mum and Pop's Garage Sale is taking place Saturday, November 10th from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Emmanuel Lutheran Church. Come shop with local parents selling new and used kids items such as clothing, toys, baby gear, and more. Tables are available to anyone in the community for $25. To sign up for your table, call Michelle at 493-634-6565. And for more information, visit emmanuellutheran.ca. Volunteer Lethbridge is looking for individuals and groups to support them at their annual holiday gift wrapping fundraiser at Park Place Shopping Center during November and December. Come for this fun and festive opportunity to help Volunteer Lethbridge's activities and services in the community. Orientation will be provided. For more information, call Chelsea at 403-332-4320. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Canada and the United States are still seeking answers in regards to the Jamal Khashoggi killing, and now Turkey is also demanding answers. Joining me now via Skype from Los Angeles is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari. Lisa, the government of Turkey is demanding truth over the murder of the Saudi journalist as a Saudi prosecutor visits.
Yes, well, it's unclear whether the true agenda of the Turkish government here is to really seek the truth because they're such justice seekers, or really call out the Saudis, which is probably more probable. The Saudis and the Turks, well, more likely that the Turks have had a problem with the U.S.-Saudi alliance because it goes against their alliance with Iran and the Shiite faction of the Middle East. So, this is one way that Turkey can really double down on Saudi Arabia and say, we need answers. The whole world is behind us. It's on the notion that this is a humanitarian cause and it was, a human rights case and this poor journalist. Meanwhile, how many journalists are brutally murdered in Turkey every single year? And we're not dismissing or making light of this one case or Jamal Khashoggi at all. It's to say that it is what it is. It's one journalist, and the Saudis should have been much more transparent, and they owe answers to their own people and to the family of this journalist. But whether or not they owe answers to the Turks and to the United States and to Egypt and all the other countries that are listed in the EU, that is more of a political point that they're trying to make right now.
The anti-Semite accused of opening fire at a Pittsburgh synagogue, killing 11 people, appeared in court late last week. 46-year-old Robert Bowers will be arraigned on a 44-count grand jury indictment that includes 11 counts of using a firearm to commit murder, Lisa.
Right, and it upsets many people, the taxpayer money and time and the grief that the families of these victims have to endure to see this man's face go to trial and to continue this. He's asked for a trial by jury. He has pleaded not guilty. They will probably ask for the death penalty in this case. This is just one of those cases that you almost wish that the perpetrator would have died in the case itself, in the attack, just because what do you do now? How can justice truly be served when we have to give him his due process and we have to have this entire thing be drawn out. But that's what our legal system's about, and that's what we're proud of. But in cases like this, it makes it very difficult. Meanwhile, there's been a lot of footage here in the United States about the single memorial services and funerals of each of the 11, and giving them the proper respect. And not only that, but to speak about this issue. And I don't know if you've heard, but there have been a couple of copycat attacks in synagogues in South Los Angeles and in Brooklyn. And this is, an ongoing thing. And I know these copycat cases are usually very low-hanging fruit. They're young kids or people who just want to kind of get attention for something that's going on in the news. But it speaks to a broader issue here of anti-Semitism. And, soon enough, all the Holocaust survivors will be gone. And when you talk about anti-Semitism, everyone, roots it back to the Holocaust. Well, the Holocaust happened because of the most unbelievable, tremendous case of anti-Semitism. But you have the people who are Holocaust deniers and this theme growing, unfortunately, rather than being eradicated off the surface of the planet. But this is the case.
Pakistani Christian Asia Bibi has been released after spending 8 years in prison for apparent blasphemy. Lisa, Bibi has been released, but will she and her lawyer make it out of Pakistan alive?
Yeah, great question. This is a story that's very close to my heart. I covered the story when she was first arrested, if you could believe. And we were hoping for her release a long time ago. And her lawyer has already left the country, and her husband has petitioned Donald Trump for her to come to the United States as a refugee. This is one of those cases that you truly look at this and say, she needs to get out of there. There are mobs that have threatened them already. And, she's a true heroine. She stood up for her Christian beliefs. She worked in a field with all men and was harassed and beaten and eventually imprisoned. So, her story is a beautiful one. I hope that if she is able to get out, wherever she's able to find refuge, that she's able to go on and tell her story.
Well, she can't make it to the United States, I'll tell you. She's welcome here in Canada anytime. Indonesian divers hunted for a second black box from an aircraft which crashed into the sea last week, killing all 189 people on board. Investigators are trying to get data from a partly damaged recorder already found.
Right, so they already found one, and it seems like there is damage to the point where they're not looking to download any of the information yet, but they're looking for a second recorder where they hear some sort of signals, maybe hinting that it could be found. The waters are shallow, under 100 feet where they are looking, even though they're all casualties. But the mystery here that the investigators are trying to dig at is that the pilot asked to return to the airport, but they don't know why. He got the clearance. He was in the midst of making that so-called, I guess, U-turn, and this happened. So I think the mystery, more so than anything else, is what specifically happened to cause this. We know that it was a faulty plane. We know that they've had issues with planes, and they're hoping that the second black box will give them some of these answers.
Recreational use marijuana has become legal here, as you know, in Canada. We also talk about the opioid crisis rearing its ugly head in many cities across Canada and the United States. But at least in Central America, they have a different crisis. Cocaine production is beginning to creep into countries like Guatemala and Honduras. Fields of cocoa plants are popping up everywhere.
Yes, absolutely. And you have the perfect storm here for these cocoa plants to sprout up everywhere. You have a very poor society. You have a farming society. You have gangs leading the commerce of illegal opioids. And most importantly, the biggest factor here is that much of the mountainous lands in these countries aren't chartered. So when people call in an anonymous kind of a hint at, this is the tip we want to give you guys. There's someone growing, opioids. My neighbor's growing opioids. They can't track the land in order to be able to get there in time and to do the unearthing or the investigations. So all of these factors put side by side and it's a vicious cycle when you think of it, because of the poor society, because of the gangs. This type of, the drug war and this area of commerce within each one of these countries, of course it's going to find itself on a main stage, because there's going to be so many people who want to trade it, and it is so lucrative. And as you know, cocaine usage in North America has been extremely high, and with younger age brackets. So because they have the clientele, there's the supply-demand kind of thing. So supply is growing because demand is growing as well. We have a lot of people focusing in on this drug war, including Donald Trump and his wife and his daughter, and we're hoping that they can make some sort of gains in this field, because again, it's this vicious cycle where people keep dying and the gangs keep taking over civilian areas, and the situation keeps getting worse.
The caravan of migrants from various countries in Central America has made its way to Mexico en route to San Diego. U.S. President Donald Trump said the U.S. could send as many as 15,000 troops to the border with Mexico as he hardens his stance against the caravan making their way north.
As many as, but we're not there yet. Right now, we're between 5,000 and 7,000 troops, and that's what the state agencies have quoted. The point that Donald Trump is trying to make here is to say that we will send as many troops as necessary to only support and back up Border Patrol and the security detail infrastructure that's already in place on the border. They're not there to heighten the situation or to escalate it to a point that it doesn't need to be escalated, but they are there to, again, provide support for the already existing security apparatus.
You know, it's interesting, I was reading some of the other caravans which left Central America, and, thousands of people, and by the time they actually made it to San Diego, there was only maybe 150, 200 people. A lot of people just say, you know what, forget it, we're out, or they'll settle in Mexico. So it's quite interesting, from thousands to just down to maybe 150 or 200. Britain and Ireland are holding and hoping to hold regular summits between leaders and ministers after Brexit. Lisa, the hope is that it will maintain ties strained by Britain's decision to leave the European Union.
Yes, so there is obviously this elephant in the room, because Ireland and the UK share a border. And Ireland obviously is not happy about Britain's exit from the European Union. Obviously, it will affect their economy as well. But at the same time, it looks like Ireland's not looking to give up an opportunity to have a decent relationship with the UK, whatever that means in terms of its future benefits. So the leaders from both countries have gotten together, and they have agreed that they will do yearly summits, and they will alternate between the venue being in Ireland and the UK, so that they can just keep things, checked up upon, so that they could have a relationship, and that the Brexit movement doesn't truly affect their relationship more than it has to. I think one of the quotes, and I don't remember it exactly, but it was, by one of the UK ministers, said something to the effect of, it's already very rocky. We don't want it to get any more rocky than it is. So we're going to kind of call out the elephant in the room, and we're going to try to work around it. So it's a positive step in that direction.
Okay, let's chat a bit more about North Korea like we've done the last few weeks. denuclearization. How's it coming so far? Is the U.S. applying the pressure? Some of the sanctions, are they working? Are they helping? How about some of the negotiations?
Yeah, so we get these conflicting reports. One day we hear that they are working, the sanctions are working, and the North Koreans are denuclearizing, whether it's through independent reports or through the South Koreans who reassure us that North Korea is doing the best that they possibly can. And then the next day we hear that they're not doing enough. We really need to slap on the pressure and maybe beef up the sanctions because they're not doing enough. Well, every so often, Secretary Pompeo revisits this issue with North Korea. He starts up the conversation once again to remind them what we expect of them, what timeline we expect of them, and how to move forward. So we're coming upon that revisit this week. Reports indicate that Secretary of State Pompeo will revisit the conversation with the North Korean leader to make sure that things will go according to plan.
Lisa, the U.S. midterm elections are coming up, and rumor is the Republicans are worried they may lose the House.
You know, Hal, this is an interesting quote that I would look down the Google News feed, and it's the same quote where Donald Trump said, yes, we may lose it, but I don't think so. So half of the news report said Donald Trump says he thinks he may lose it, and half of them said he doesn't think they're going to lose it. So we're back to, the 50-50. It's the fake news stuff that we were talking about before, Hal. Truth be told, this could go either way. As any election, right? But obviously, this is a very important election, probably more so for the Republicans than the Democrats, in the sense that this is a referendum on Donald Trump and how this administration is doing, and probably some sort of indicator as to where we're going towards for 2020 and the presidential election. So the Democrats are really just rallying the base to get people to go out and vote on both sides, really, I should say. I haven't seen a rallying campaign like this in many years to get people to go out and vote. So we'll see what will happen. I think that we may be surprised, but we'll have this conversation next week and we'll see what happens.
You know, it's interesting. Many of the Democrats I've been listening to are saying, this is it. This is the end of the Donald Trump regime. What are you hearing?
Well, yes, if they are able to win back parts of government with a Democrat majority, they believe that will give them some sort of momentum, and that will be the end of the Donald Trump regime, because then that momentum will give them a leg up for 2020. The fear for many who are probably in the middle or middle to right would be that if that is the case and they're able to win Senate or House, then that would mean a kind of filibustering on every single issue and really a non-productive government from now until 2020. So that's 2 years of just an unfortunate time in our government. If they're able to work together, which I don't think they'll be able to, I think it just speaks to a very partisan time in our country's history. It's extremely partisan, extremely emotional. It doesn't truly speak to facts or to policies that will help the country as a whole. We can't agree on subjects that are nonpartisan, like national security, human rights, immigration. Then what can we really agree on? So that's the scary part, is that if this will be not only a shutting down of the Donald Trump regime, but a shutting down of government. And that's what we'll have to wait and see.
I love covering elections, I got to tell you. You've got your midterms next spring here in Alberta. We've got our provincial election, and then we've got our federal election as well. So it should be fun times. Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Thanks again, Lisa.
My pleasure.
Previously on Fighting for Ezekiel.
And I just remember Colette giving me a phone call and just saying, we've got a sick boy here.
And I remember that we had talked about things that I did with my kids when they had croup.
So I hadn't seen him for about a 2.5-day period from Wednesday till Friday. And he was substantially better by that point.
And I was there the night before Ezekiel died. And I saw nothing that alarmed me at all.
In a short period of time, it went from being just something of interest, like, is this something that we need to act on? Like, everything else is fine, to now he's not breathing.
So that just came on that suddenly?
It came on pretty quick.
911 emergency, do fire, please fire ambulance.
Hi, yes, my son's not breathing.
By Thursday, they were diagnosing Ezekiel with having brain death.
And now, part 2 of Fighting for Ezekiel, a Bridge City News exclusive.
Today in part 2, we are going to hear details of charges being laid, the media response, and discussion about parental rights. David and Colette Stephan are parents, just like most of us, loving their children and sometimes faced with having to make tough decisions on the health of their child. We have all had to decide whether or not our child is sick enough to take to emergency, or just to wait it out. Not many of us would likely think that our decision would ever end up with criminal charges being laid.
You went through a very difficult period here then, of course, with life support being disconnected and your son dying. Funeral plans, all these things, practically speaking, had to take place. Time of mourning. And at what point were you actually informed of charges being laid in the middle of all of that?
It was nearly a year later. So what happened is we wanted closure because we were really confused about what led to the passing of Ezekiel. So we ordered an autopsy report because we wanted to find out what he'd actually died from. Because the doctor seemed confused about it. There was no solid answers. So we ordered the autopsy report, and it was upon receiving the autopsy report that I became suspicious that they were going to lay charges. And then sure enough, the next month, so we're talking February 2013, we get a phone call from the RCMP.
Once charges were laid, and by the time the actual court trial began, the Stephans were receiving nationwide media attention, even attracting international coverage because of the controversial nature of the case. At times, it pitted those favoring natural health approaches against those in favor of conventional medicine.
Do you remember the first report you saw there that got your attention saying, hold on a second, that's not exactly how it happened?
I would never forget it. Okay. And the reason why is because of the amount of death threats that began flowing in immediately.
Death threats?
Death threats.
To you?
We've had over 300.
Oh my goodness.
So the substantial amount of death threats that began right away, that were coming in through social media, and I was seeing this, and what's going on, right? Like there's all of a sudden this buzz. And so I went hunting, and sure enough, CBC, who hadn't been involved at all, they hadn't done any reporting with the preliminary trial or anything like that with us personally. They had just, they'd done a general report back in 2012 or 2013 when we were charged, but they weren't involved like CTV or Global or any of the other news outlets were. But they got involved the very first day of the trial, and they put out an article that was so misleading and so, as a general reader, you couldn't help but be absolutely filled with anger towards these parents based on the way that they wrote it. And I believe the headline was something like, parents attempt to treat dying toddler with bacterial meningitis with maple syrup, fruit, and juice, or something like that. Like, it was something so out there that made it look like we were just a bunch of crazies. And so people were angry.
Now, was the article, again, you feel it was leading people down a certain path, a certain flavor, if you will.
It looked like it had intent.
But was there inaccuracies in the report? For example, again, treating bacterial meningitis with maple syrup, you would disagree with that?
Well, we didn't treat anything with maple syrup. I mean, that wasn't a treatment. That I still don't know if it is a treatment for anything, right? Like it
was simply designed to get fluid into your son.
Exactly. So that was completely misleading. And then fruit and juice, trying to treat him with fruit and juice, I don't even know where that came from. I guess if you were to break it right down, in one of the statements, the police statements, Colette talks about making smoothies from fruit and juice. But that wasn't a treatment.
Now, media also labeled you as being an anti-vaxxer. So where would you put yourself, I guess, on that whole issue? It's part of the conversation for sure. And there are other parents in Canada who are not in favor of vaccinations. That's hit the news a number of times over the last decades here. Would you label yourselves as anti-vaxxers?
I guess probably the best way to answer is, are we for vaccines? Absolutely not. Okay. Were we back then? No. Are we now? We're even more substantiated in our viewpoints on that. Okay. When we take a look at it and we see the damage that's reoccurring from these vaccines, when we take a look at the toxic elements in there, like the mercury or aluminum, and what that does on a neurological level, what it does in regard to brain damage and compromising people's cognitive function and all that, not for them. when we take a look at the lack of safety evidence that's coming out or that hasn't come out on the vaccines, yeah, we take issue with that as well.
So you're concerned about the safety and whether or not it's actually doing what it's supposed to do.
That's correct. And so as part of the reason why this came up in the court case, though, is the Crown was trying to use our court case as a precedent-setting case wherein parents could be held criminally liable if they didn't vaccinate their children.
So would you be of the opinion that the Crown and perhaps key leaders in Alberta Health Services really tried to make an example out of you through this case to send a message perhaps to any parents who don't follow the government-approved line, I guess, whether it comes to vaccinations or otherwise? You know, they need to comply or else? Is that kind of the...
Yeah.
Yeah,
definitely.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying definitely that's where they're wanting to go, taking more away from parental rights.
Yeah, and even though they didn't follow through with it in court, once they saw our lineup of expert witnesses that we had on board to fight off the vaccine issue, so they completely shied away away from it, and we didn't have to bring in those expert witnesses.
Well, that's interesting. So that didn't last very long in the courtroom then?
No, they ran away from it really quickly as soon as they saw that we actually had a defense.
One issue that came up in media coverage was the story of little Ezekiel suffering from symptoms of a back that was so stiff it prevented him from sitting in his car seat. He was instead laid up on a mattress during a trip to pick up naturopathic supplements from Lethbridge. The Crown's argument was that with these symptoms, any reasonable parent should have taken their child to see a doctor. We asked the Steffens to explain.
At that point, he's 18 months old, and we haven't yet transitioned him from the infant car seat over to the front-facing car seat, but he was at that point anyways. And on a good day, he didn't really like his car seat anyways, restrictive, and you know, just being in a car seat. I know I wouldn't want to be in a car seat.
Yep.
And so anyways, I put him into it, and he didn't cry or anything like that. But when Colette looked at him, she just said, he looks really uncomfortable now. Like, and so that's why we opted. Okay, well, based on the situation at hand, and that we need to get into signing these lawyers' papers, maybe we should just, you know, err on the side of comfort here. And so we took his memory foam topper off of his mattress and just put that in the back of the vehicle so that he had mobility. And one of us just stayed back there with him, just making sure that, you know, he was sipping on his smoothie, that type of thing.
So to make it clear, from your perspective, you're saying you felt your son's symptoms were actually improving. They were not terrible, and his back was not arched to any kind of a point where this was, you know, a meningitis sort of symptom. It was simply he was uncomfortable with this car seat. He was growing out of it, that sort of thing. What was the evidence that the Crown presented? Was there anything really specific to indicate that you did not provide the necessaries of life for your son Ezekiel?
No, what it was, and it was interesting, that the judge actually made mention of this at one point. He said this is a really peculiar case because these charges would typically be used for negligent parents, but all the evidence that's before the courts and the jury is that the Steffens are loving, caring, and attentive parents. And so he said this is really quite peculiar. So even he highlighted that point. So no, they never substantiated that we were negligent. What it came down to is that we didn't meet the criminal code standard or approved standard of care. And what that was in reference to was solely medical treatment, which is...
So not seeking medical treatment in a timely manner.
That's right.
Okay.
Which is peculiar because never once during the court case was it established that had we gone and seen a doctor that it would have actually even changed the outcome.
Now the Crown, I believe, was trying to prove that you as parents had made what they call a marked departure, I think that's the term they use, from the norm, that you had not responded to the health needs of your son as a reasonably minded parent would do. So that has to be proved beyond a reasonable doubt. So when Ezekiel got worse, you did call a registered nurse with 16 years experience in the emergency room to come check on your child, to take his vitals. I guess the question becomes, is that a marked departure from the norm? How would you see it?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, you know, the question was posed a few hours before Terry Manders got there. Do we take him to the doctor or do we not? And my response was, I don't believe so. I don't see anything there. And Colette thought, you know, I'm just going to take it to another level here. And so she decided, you know, well, I'm going to call Terry Manders and see what she has to say. I said, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, so because this is really the crux of the whole case here, is what you did or not did, you know, what is it a marked departure from what other reasonable parents would do?
After a contentious 2-week trial with conflicting evidence at times from medical experts and confusing instructions given to the jury by the trial judge, the Steffens were in fact convicted of not providing the necessaries of life for their son.
How was your response when you learned that you had lost the case and you are now guilty of not providing the necessaries of life for your son?
There was a lot of mixed emotions.
Yeah.
There was, you know, first of all, we learned that the media was reporting half an hour before the jury even came out with a verdict, that the media was reporting what the verdict was, that they were guilty. And then the jury comes and then they give it, but 6 out of 12 of them are crying. And you could see from the tears, you could see from their mannerisms that it was a decision that they didn't want to make. But based on the judge's charge to them, they were basically forced into a corner to have to make this decision. And it wasn't a quick decision that they made. It took over 24 hours for them to make it. And so, you know, we were just shaking our heads at the whole thing, saying, what happened here? What has taken place here? We knew that there was an issue with the charge to the jury, but we didn't think the jury would side with the judge on it and follow suit. So, but it was devastating because then we didn't know what was going to happen with our children. And Colette can speak a lot more to that about the stresses as a mother.
That would hit you like a train, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the judge sentenced you to, David, 4 months in jail, I believe, and I think it was 3 months of house arrest for yourself, Colette.
Yes.
And then the Crown appealed that. They wanted harsher sentences for both of you. Did either of you actually do jail time or house time in this process?
Yes, I did the 3 weeks, and he was in jail for 3 weeks.
For 3 weeks, okay.
Yeah,
and then community service as well, I think, on top of that, correct?
Yeah, we didn't do the community service. That was following the sentences being fulfilled, that then we'd have to do all that community service within 2 years. And but all of that was suspended or stayed with the bail conditions. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, being on appeal. And so did 3 weeks of jail time. And the reason for that difference in sentencing is they sentenced me to 4 months in jail because I was speaking out about the matter. Because I was speaking out about the hypocrisy of it all, saying, you've got an ambulance service that they were made aware of the fact that they didn't have the proper equipment. They were made aware of that for over a year previous to my son's death, and they didn't act on it, and so you've actually got a case of criminal negligence, which is a greater charge, and yet no investigation's taken place, no charges have been laid. Every child in that zone was in danger if they required an ambulance and needed an airway, and yet they weren't held accountable, and yet you're holding us accountable for a lesser charge, even though you've got criminal negligence that's abundantly clear over here. And so because I kept on speaking out about that,
So you felt like a big boot was coming down on you from higher power, essentially, I suppose.
Well, how they categorized it was that I wasn't remorseful because I wouldn't shut up about it. Because there was such an injustice and I wasn't willing to let it slide. You know, you can't hold us accountable. Let's just say hypothetically that you know, we were guilty of everything that they charged us of. You still got a glaring case of where the paramedics were saying, you know, we need this equipment in the ambulance for over a year, and yet the Alberta Health Services wasn't meeting that demand in that zone, and yet other zones had that equipment. In fact, one of the paramedics was working 2 different zones. He said, you know, at one point he's working with ambulances that were properly equipped in one zone, but yet ill-equipped in another zone. And so you've got this situation taking place, and yet they're holding nobody accountable of it. and yet they're trying to throw us under the bus.
We've heard some very different narratives today. Media reports supporting the Crown's allegations of negligent parents and their parents sharing their side of the story. Is there a place to hold government departments liable if indeed proper equipment was not available and if ambulances were not dispatched properly? We will investigate this and more in Part 3 tomorrow.
Next time on Fighting for Ezekiel, did 911 dispatch the wrong ambulance?
But I do know we were there because the next morning after we heard about the incident, we said, I wonder what happened. We never got the call last night. We were all in town.
If they had received the call, would Ezekiel still be alive today? And was evidence withheld?
There was no logs of anything. There was no lab reports. We've asked for them repeatedly. We may have never even discovered that our son had gone for over 8 minutes without oxygen in the ambulance, because it would have been like finding a needle in a haystack in the medical files that were supplied to us.
Did expert testimony line up with medical records?
A lab report that says there wasn't any bacteria. You've got a call made to them saying you need to find bacteria. And then you've got a revised report saying, okay, there was a little bit of bacteria. And then an email saying that they found it through a non-clinical test.
This and more in Part 3 of Fighting for Ezekiel.